Welcome to A Lawyer's Guide to the Galaxy, a podcast about geek culture by lawyers with your hosts, Ben Siders and Kirk Taman.
And welcome back to A Lawyer's Guide to the Galaxy, the podcast that asks interesting questions that don't have any answers, with your host, Ben Siders, that's me, and the other guy is, as always, Kirk Damon.
That's Kirk, as in the captain of the Enterprise.
We are, I just forgot what our intro says. We are intellectual property lawyers and certified geeks practicing law in St. Louis, Missouri. You can find me, Ben, on Twitter at Benjamin Siders, and you can find Kirk at KirkDMN. I just realized when I was saying that, how awkward it is to say. Lawyer's Guide to the Galaxy, the podcast that asks interesting questions. There's a lot of S's, a lot of hissing in there. So maybe you need to rewrite that or something, or just record a bumper so I can just play it every time. We're talking today about video games and Twitch. This question actually came to us on, I think, Facebook. We got a question from somebody who said, "Why don't you talk about Twitch?" I'm like, well, I don't know. We probably should. So we're gonna. Twitch is, so let's start with the basics. What is Twitch, Kirk?
So Twitch is, I guess the best way to put it is I would call it a video streaming platform. It obviously does audio sort of stuff like that. I consider it akin to YouTube, consider any other user-created content platform, but it's become particularly associated with and has a lot of content about playing video games.
Yeah, that seems to be the focus, although I do recall when the Blues had their Stanley Cup run, there was a bunch of NHL stuff on there too. So, and you'll see like World of Warcraft, or we play Hearthstone, or we used to. We don't play so much anymore.
One of us plays Hearthstone anymore, though I think we both now, and I play State of Survival reasonably aggressively, and I'm seeing stuff on Twitch and State of Survival as well.
Yeah, so I remember when Hearthstone would have like expansion announcements, they'd live stream the announcement on Twitch sometimes. And Twitch has a lot of tie-ins with video games where, there's my computer reminding me to record the podcast. We would see things where you can get loot crates if you connect your Twitch account to your whatever game account or get special perks and things like that. So Twitch is very deeply embedded into what we call gaming culture and streaming in particular. And so if you've never seen it, it really is very YouTube-like. You get to it and people upload, you can upload videos and content, but for the most part, whereas YouTube is mostly uploaded content, I feel like Twitch, their strength is live stream content.
Yeah, they're really doing a lot of, live stream content. It's not so much pre-recorded content. I shouldn't say recorded content, but pre-recorded content, where somebody's recording it on another device and then uploading it, which is really what you see in YouTube. This is people, I think, using Twitch to record. They're either presenting it live or they're, presenting the recordings later on.
We followed some streamers from time to time with Hearthstone, and you'd see them sometimes say, hey, I'm going live on Twitch, from 2 to 4. Yeah. And they just live stream their games and they talk and they have little chat windows and people can come in, and there's a way you can monetize all this. There's like a currency in Twitch you can get. You can donate the currency to streamers, and if you're good at this, if you're engaging, and if you're attractive, you can make some money off of being on Twitch and having people watch you play video games.
I think one of the big things you really had with Twitch, I think a lot of where, in some sense Twitch got its associations and things like that, is I think Twitch was just a very good platform for people where they were doing game walkthroughs. Where it was the, hey, and I commented about this, and I think we've said it in some of the other podcasts. I know I talked about it in my Complexity of Games podcast. Games don't have instruction manuals anymore. No. There's no instructions at all, other than maybe how to install it or download it or configure.
Yeah, you download it and then you just load it and play it. So games increasingly have the instructions built into the gaming experience. Part of the game is teaching you how to play the game. You have to have tutorials, and if that's not enough to figure it out, then you have to go online and figure it out, because you don't even get a physical box anymore to put the instructions in, and nobody's opening a PDF that you download with the game, assuming you can even find it.
Yeah, and I think the real thing with it, what you're seeing with it, is you're seeing a lot of the instruction has to come from other players that have done it.
Yeah.
The beta testers often. Other times when it comes to, maximizing the game experience or how to do best in this environment. And I think you're seeing a lot of that again as games complexity is going up, of people trying to, for lack of a better term, it's almost an industry to reverse engineer the game algorithms.
Yeah.
And then, but not reverse engineer them, to just tell them this is people how you use them. Whereas, the game designer could just say, hey, here's how the algorithm works, here's how to maximize it. They don't. They put it out there, and then they expect these people to go and play it for, hours and hours and hours and defeat the algorithm, and then tell everybody else how to do it.
In some sense, it's what we all used to do in tabletop gaming with D&D back in the day. It's just min-max your character to figure out how you can have a level 1 character that has a THAC0 of 12, The answer was a wood elf specialized in longbow with high strength.
Well, it's one of the things you did in every game. I think when you played, role-playing games in conjunction with it. there's always different classes of characters. There were different races of characters. I played a ton of Shadowrun. You always played the troll as the street samurai. You never played the elf as the street samurai because he wasn't any good at it. And so that was the thing, is you had those types of things where you kind of had some of that min-maxing. I did a lot of it actually in custom mechs in BattleTech. And how do you essentially stack on more weapons, or more armor for these things.
Yeah, that's funny. That's what Twitch is kind of becoming, I think, is a place to go and build your skill with
I think it's becoming a more general, audiovisual platform. I think one of the things we're seeing right now, and I'm just going to mention, generally, we're talking about Twitch here, but, what we're seeing, what I feel we're seeing in conjunction with a lot of social media, for lack of a better term, audiovisual platforms, Twitch, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, any of these kind of things.
The influencer platforms.
They're all converging. They're all sort of coming together to be a lot of the same stuff, which is just a platform for people to post audio visual.
Yep.
Now, yes, Twitch has particular association with gaming. TikTok has particular association with dancing, stuff like that. But you can see everything on everything. I mean, there's commercial announcements now, by businesses on TikTok, you see
Facebook's
stuff like that
getting
on
into
Twitch.
this too.
Yeah.
Facebook has Reels now, which I think is just Instagram and the TikTok.
And so I think you got a lot of this, and I think maybe we really should just look at this and just say, when we're talking about Twitch, we're really talking about audiovisual platforms. But the reason we're focusing, I think, particularly on Twitch is, one, that was the sort of comment from the reader, but also Twitch is so associated with video games, and particularly player walkthroughs in video games, where you are going to be showing on screen video game play.
Yeah. And I think video games present unique issues. And I think there's two forms of art. And although Roger Ebert famously said a video game is not and can never be art, I firmly disagree. It's literally nothing but art.
Lots of art.
Video, of all the types of art we have, I think music and video games are among the two most difficult to deal with in the law. Music, all you gotta do is look at the Copyright Act, and how much of it is basically very, very specific rules for dealing with how weird music is amongst all our different art forms. It hasn't gotten polluted yet by video games. But that day may be coming. We'll see. But video games, in particular, present strange issues because. So let's before we recorded, Kirk and I were talking through this. Let's go through an example. Let's say I was to just upload a copy of Star Wars Episode 4 to Twitch.
Yeah.
Okay. Simple enough. If I'm Lucasfilm, I can go to my copyright registration certificate that I have for whatever version got uploaded, and then I can send a takedown notice to Twitch and say, that's mine. Here's my registration certificate. If you were to go to the Copyright Office and pull up the deposit I sent to them and play it side by side with this thing that got uploaded, it is identical, frame by frame. It's the exact same work. So that's mine. And likewise, if I uploaded a 5-minute, excerpt, I'd say, well, here's those 5 minutes. It's exactly mine. That is not the case with video games.
The problem you bump into with video games is, as we say, it's the streamer in the course of doing this is creating some of the content. Now, obviously, the imagery of their character, how their character moves, these are all things that have been programmed. They've all been designed by art directors. I mean, anybody who's been into the art of video games, you've seen, oftentimes the, oil paint drawings that become characters, that they start off with, things like that. There's a lot of what we'd say more traditional art, oftentimes behind a video game, but we can't say that there's no video, there's no art in here, there's nothing created. Again, the appearance of a monster or the appearance of a character, could easily be a picture.
Yeah.
It's just when you do the things in conjunction with it and you look at what is coming across in the video game, the exact play is being carried out by the player. Oftentimes it's something that's never been done. And I'm going to reference it. There's a couple times we talked about it. One of the things we're also joking about is we also both happen to have just seen Free Guy.
Yes.
On Disney, which I would say in conjunction, if you haven't seen it, that is a movie worth seeing, surprisingly, if you're into gaming culture. It's surprisingly intelligent.
Yeah.
While at the same time, it's accessible to pretty much anybody. My kids loved it.
My kids did too.
It's also really funny at times, and it does kind of have some fun making fun of gamer culture.
It has a not subtle, but subtle enough incisive commentary on gamer pro culture.
Yeah, exactly. But you get it. You kind of you get why it's funny and sort of things like that, behind it. But it's also got a cute story. There's lots of sort of cute things that occur in it. But one of the things with it, and it's I think the big thing with it is when the whole focus of it, and just give you the focus of the movie, is trying to find this potentially hidden piece of code which was stolen. That's an issue behind the basic movie. And the comment with it is trying to watch this streamer and the video he has of a secret level. And that's something that starts on right in the beginning, and the secret level has something to do with this. But the concept of somebody going in and finding this, what was effectively a glitch in the game, exploiting the glitch, and then posting this all over Twitter platform and Twitch platform, something the equivalent of Twitch in this, is, I think, a very, useful commentary of the way of looking at what a lot of what we see in this. Is that code there? Of course the code is there, but finding the glitch is not part of the game. That was never intended by the people who generated the game, that somebody would go and find these glitches and exploit them. I know from talking to my son about it, I didn't know this, but apparently there's a open glitch in Minecraft where you can actually build above bedrock.
Yes. My kid knows how to do that too.
I had no idea about this, but apparently they kept it now. It's actually like something they're not going to get rid of.
So a side note, the way I discovered this is that I went to, you can do it in the Nether, I guess. Yeah. And I discovered it because I went to our Nether, those of you who haven't played Minecraft, I apologize, it'd be very boring to you, but we went into the Nether, and they had, Hayden, or one of our colleagues' kids, had built a gold farming apparatus that towered above the top of the bedrock in the Nether. Since there's no monsters that spawn up there, going back to your point about the reverse engineering the algorithm, people have figured out how to maximize the spawn rate. Yeah. So they built this huge platform like 100 blocks above the bedrock where nothing else could ever spawn. So the only thing that spawns is the stuff you want, because you put down the kind of terrain to get it to spawn. Then you can generate an insane amount of gold. Yeah. It must have taken days to set this up. Yeah. But the point is, you use a glitch to break to the bedrock to do that.
Yeah, and my son has done it in conjunction with using it for transportation, where you basically use nether portals, and because there's, again, nothing spawns and it's completely flat, you can just have, rocket-propelled, mine carts that just take you between nether portals. But yeah, so I think the thing behind that is talking about, we can look and say there's definitely artwork in these games, there's definitely intellectual property in these games, there's copyrighted works inside these games. But a lot of this is not what was ever really intended or originally developed as that artwork. That's the kind of things that we're bumping into.
We talked about this on our Minecraft episode from season 1, which maybe I'll run that as a rewind one of these days. But with video games are unique because, with Twitch, you're not uploading the game code, right? Like if I'm a video games studio and I'm going to file a copyright,
you cannot play the game watching something on Twitch. You still have to go out and buy the game.
You still have the game.
To you.
So if I'm filing a copyright registration, I'm going to file it on the object code for my game. I'm going to file it on the source code, but neither of those is what gets uploaded. It's a video of somebody playing the game. So unlike other forms of art, it'd be more like the musical instrument as opposed to, and then the player is producing the music. Yeah. And then much like a musical instrument, the sound that comes out, the range of sounds, the range of what you can produce is limited by whoever designed the instrument, but ultimately the player is in charge of what comes out of it. With an instrument, we would say the player of the instrument owns the copyright in the song they produce, assuming it's otherwise original, even though the tones are defined by, the shape of the horn, the quality of the instrument. Likewise with a different type of software, like say a Photoshop, a graphics editing program. Photoshop would never stake a claim to what graphic art you produce that comes out of it. Yet, with video games, we don't think about it that way. And with a game like Minecraft, it's especially peculiar because the Minecraft worlds are either procedurally generated, which we know from the Selfie Monkey case. It's questionable whether there's any copyright that the Minecraft producers would own in the procedurally generated worlds. They would own the code to generate the worlds, but not necessarily the worlds themselves. I think that's up in the air. But then also, we can reskin everything. So all the art that's distributed with the game, I could have a Twitch stream where nothing I show was ever produced by Minecraft. Yeah. So now what?
Yeah, now you get into the things with it. It's an interesting one. The one that I get into, part of it, and I'm going to shoot a little bit from the hip there if I remember the thing with it. Originally, the idea that there was copyright in the imagery of the game came from Duke Nukem, if I remember correctly, was the actual case that had to do with it. And
that was the level case. The level case.
Well, there's the level case where they developed side levels that were about to be used. But there was also an issue where they actually did register screenshots. And again, I believe it was from Duke Nukem. I'm going off of what I remember from when I did my paper, 20 years ago in connection with the universe, of having to do with the idea that screenshots could be copyrighted. So the appearance of, the first-person shooter, the gun in the center of the hands, the, appearances to what it was. There could be a particular look, which was Duke Nukem, versus being other first-person shooters, Doom at the time, and stuff like that. So that's some of where this comes from, is the idea that there is copyright in that end look of a game. There's also a case having to do with generation of custom levels and the distribution of custom levels, and the idea that that was a violation of copyright. Although there you get into the idea that, somewhat they did use the code behind it, but it wasn't the code they said was the violation. It was some of the appearance of the levels. So we've got into an area where I think our law in this is, think early first-person shooter. I mean, so we're talking early 90s.
Yeah.
As to the time
Wolfenstein was 90, 91?
I want to say, like 99,
maybe
91, something
that.
like that.
Yeah.
And, I'm trying to remember, because Doom is 94, if I remember right, 93, 94.
Our millennial listeners are saying, you guys are old.
So, and those are the things. But it's, I think, one of those where we've got to realize that the copyright law, when you say, yes, we're old, copyright law in this is only 30 years old.
Well, just recognize a First Amendment right in video games. In the 21st century. I mean, that's relatively new, and it wasn't clear that the courts would do that. So there's a lot of oddities with video games. For purposes of this podcast, we wanted to raise all that just to show here be dragons, right? Like this is all up in the air.
Well, how many times in this podcast have we told you guys copyright's complicated? And just pointing out all these problems.
At the beginning, these are questions that don't have any answers. If they did, you wouldn't want to talk to us about it. But we're going to assume for purposes of basically the rest of the podcast that somebody is streaming video game content, and what they're streaming is copyrighted. We'll just assume it's copyrighted, and not by them. It's by the video game company, although I do think there is a reasonable argument to be made for joint authorship in certain circumstances. That gets into weird things with derivative works that we're just not going to talk about right now. So let's assume, for sake of argument, the video game's copyrighted. How then do the streamers get the rights to display this stuff on Twitch? Do they need any rights? Let's start with that. Do they need any rights to display this content on Twitch?
Yeah, I'm starting to technically yes, unless we're going to call this fair use.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's about the only way we're going to get around it being fair use. The hard part with it is, and I think we've said it before on this podcast, and I mean, I've definitely said it in my presentations I give on copyright, fair use is really, really complicated, and it's a balancing test.
Yes.
And so the hard part is you can't just unequivocally say something which would be done on Twitch is fair use. This would be something we'd have to analyze every single Twitch streamer, what exactly they're doing, in conjunction with it. So I
because
think
they are monetizing, there's a commercial aspect.
Obviously a commercial aspect.
But then how do you do, before I do fair use, let's start with this. The scope of the copyright rights that the owner gets depends on what kind of work it is. So let's first identify what kind of work the video game is, okay? So if you're curious, if you're playing along at home, Google 17 USC 102. You will get the list of copyrighted works. And run through these and see what Kirk thinks. The first type of work is literary work. No.
Not literary work.
Although software is usually categorized as literary work, but it's not, as a video game.
But we're talking about the appearance at this point in time.
It has literary elements usually, right?
Sometimes it does. I think modern games, not nearly so much as games we grew up on.
But the RPGs we had were basically books you played. Okay, number 2, musical works.
It has musical work in it.
It has music in it.
Now, that music may not be being used by the streamer because they may have the volume off, they may be, because a lot of times they're talking over it.
And that creates additional messes because then you have to have sync rights too, which we're, again, not going to get into. Dramatic works, including any accompanying music.
Yeah, now we're starting to sound right.
Getting closer. Dramatic works are like plays usually.
But it can be a movie.
Yeah, but there's usually a storyboard or a screenplay-like background to a lot of video games, especially.
Yeah. But dramatic work can also include like a live poetry reading. So.
Yeah, it could. Yeah, exactly. So, but I'm thinking like Minecraft. Is Minecraft a dramatic work? No, not really. Okay, number 4, pantomimes and choreographic work. Well, maybe in Fortnite.
I think probably not, because we're really talking about applying something to something else.
Yeah.
Which I don't think is quite accurate here.
Okay, number 5, pictorial, graphic, and sculptural works.
That's more still image.
Yeah, that mostly means still images. Yeah, sculptures, no. Pictorial is usually photographs. Graphic art. I mean, there are graphics in the game. 6, motion pictures. So close.
So close, yeah. I mean, and that's where we're kind of getting motion pictures, dramatic works. Why is motion picture not a dramatic work? I mean...
Yeah, well, you could make it... So motion picture could be... The dramatic work is like the screenplay. The motion picture is the film.
The result,
But there's another category, number 6, motion pictures and other audiovisual works.
Yeah.
That sounds like
That's where it's probably going to end up,
Now, the interesting thing is, what they meant there is other things like motion pictures, TV shows, short
Streaming
films, things like that. I don't think the Copyright Act, when they wrote this, meant, and video games too. 7, sound recordings. Again, no, there are sound recordings in it, but no. And then 8, architectural works. No.
I would also say it's already not a sound recording because it's not actually the recording, it's just the performance, which is a different category.
Yeah. So none of these are really a good fit, and I think I don't actually know where video games fit. I know software.
I think they fall under audiovisual.
Yeah, software is usually literary work, but there are other elements that would all be combined together, and it may be one of the what they call a combined work, where you have multiple different forms of copyrights put together. But that makes it even messier because in the combined work is the same type of work of what if it's a combination of, but what if it's a combination of lots of different stuff? Like
that's part of the reason I jumped into fair use and sort of started with fair use. Is what I really sort of jumped into there is because I want to say fair use doesn't work.
Yeah.
And I think that's our key problem. It's fair use would require the level of complexity to determine whether or not any one stream on Twitch, is fair use is just beyond anything. I mean, even an AI couldn't do it in today's day and age. I mean, I remember hearing a statistic, and this is years ago, and I don't know if it's even true, but I remember hearing a statistic in a presentation, and the comment they made is that every 7 minutes, there is as much audio-visual content uploaded to YouTube as has been broadcast on broadcast TV. Yeah. Period.
Yeah.
The entire history of broadcast TV is covered by 7 minutes of YouTube.
We bring the statistic up frequently because it bears repeating. And that's a dated one, too. I'm sure it's more at this point.
Dated.
How do you go through all this? And then let's look at the fair use factors, because that's the simplest way to avoid. You could go through the copyright rights. And if you want to, again, playing along at home, 17 U.S.C. 106 has the copyright rights. But if you look at that, you'll see that what rights you need depend on what kind of work it is. And as we just established, it's a little bit of a lot of things.
Yeah.
So
there could imply a lot of things. Yeah. Again, we can look at it and say we can make it an audiovisual work by eliminating the sound, by making it a pure screenshot, watching it occur. We probably can say it's an audiovisual work at that point in time, or a dramatic work if we want to say it's done live as a stream.
Yeah.
So we can potentially force it into one category, but again, it's somewhat dependent on what is the person streaming.
I think you're right. Audiovisual is probably the best. Like the software itself is the literary work.
Yeah.
But the stream of somebody playing it is more like a performance. That would be more audiovisual work.
That's also where you get a bit into dramatic. Is it because a performance and a performative work, if it's live streamed versus recorded, that's the movie versus dramatic work question.
So you get around all this by looking at fair use, and we've done this analysis before. We'll run through it real quick. The fair use factors aren't clean or neat here. So factor 1, the purpose and character of the use, including whether it is of commercial nature or for nonprofit educational purposes. Yeah. I don't know why there's an or there. Something can be both commercial and nonprofit educational.
I think the thing was, in some sense, just the way it got written, I think, is to the way they have it. But I think the vast majority of Twitch streaming people are intending this to not be educational in traditional educational sense.
They're definitely, they want to teach people, right? Because, you're tuning in because it's entertaining, but you're also learning how to play better.
Now, in some sense, you are learning how to play better. In some sense, you're not. You are just tuning in for entertainment.
Yeah, sometimes just for that. So, it's not strongly nonprofit educational, commercial nature.
Some is bluntly commercial.
Yeah, someone's getting paid. Number 2, the nature of the copyrighted work. Well, now we're back to where we started.
Yeah, where we started.
What exactly is it that's being infringed? Because the stream that the person produces is based on their inputs into the game, and they're influencing the output. And I think there's an argument that they are possibly a co-author of whatever the resulting content is.
And this is where I think we now bump into the question of what does, the copyright in the screenshot versus the copyright in this code. And that's why I brought up the Duke Nukem case, is to just sort of point out, when we talk about the idea of there being copyright in the imagery, this is a relatively new concept compared to, video games are a relatively new concept. They've only been since what, the late 70s? Mm-hmm. That kind of thing is what it is. So we've got these relatively new concepts colliding. We've also got, when we were talking about the case law around what was screenshots, we were talking about discs that were sold in conjunction with alternate levels. This is a different world from what streaming is. You could have probably registered YouTube as a domain name for 25 cents if you could have registered domain names at the time.
For those of you who were born after about 1996, there used to be stores you would go to, and they had the games in boxes.
GameStop.
I guess they still do have that. So, I haven't been to one forever. I guess what do you buy at GameStop these days?
Well, I know some of it's cartridges for the game systems.
Oh yeah, see, I don't play console
the one that I'll think is interesting, and I'll comment about. So I was actually just had to clean our garage out, and I actually have in there. I found it. there was a guy who was doing a computer museum in California, and he was looking for stuff that was, like packaged and things like that, trying to get original computers and original software. And I actually never sent it to him. I have the game Black and White. I don't know how many people actually remember that game or not. Ben doesn't even know what it is. It was a unique concept of a game because you get to sort of be in the position of an overlord to take on this world. And you can be good or evil. That was the black or white. And you can basically turn this place into an awful hellhole, or you can turn it into a paradise, and both are successful. And so it's how do you sort of follow through in the course of doing that. But I had the box, I have all the discs, I have all the instruction manuals, because I only played the game like once. I didn't like it, actually, when I tried playing it. And I just packed it up. And so I had this thing packed up because I was going to send it to this guy with the computer museum because it's original boxed software. Mm-hmm. It still has an actual like Best Buy sales tag on it. It was $39.95. And so, but it's those kind of things where, the world was very different at the time we're talking about with this. And the time that we started to recognize maybe there needs to be rights in the art, the appearance of video games. And I'm not sure that law has advanced that much either.
And I don't know that fair use knows how to deal with it either. So let's look at the third factor, the amount and substantiality of the portion used. Well, how do you
count? What portion?
Portion of what? Of the source code? I mean, so if you're playing Hearthstone, where you're going to use most of the source code, I guess, and most of the art, or are you? Because you're only going to play, you only have 30 cards in your deck out of the thousands that there are. So maybe you're not using that much. Or Minecraft, who knows? How do you count that, even how much you're using? So that's an almost incoherent inquiry. And then the effect of the use upon the potential market for or the value of the copyrighted work. This is the one where people say, aren't I actually increasing the value of your work by giving you exposure?
Yeah.
That line of thinking is generally not recognized, except in Google v. Oracle, but otherwise generally not recognized. However, I think there is a compelling argument with Twitch that these people are having no negative effect at all.
Yeah, I think one of the real keys to this to keep in mind with the game is I can watch thousands and thousands of videos on Twitch. I cannot play the game.
Still can't play it, yeah.
Yeah, I still can't play it. In order for me to play the game, I have to get the game in order to do it. I mean, and that's the thing, like, taking, again, sort of a traditional YouTube case and the questions of, like, music infringement, technically I could listen to the Prince song by watching the Dancing Baby video over and over and over again instead of buying the song. So we can kind of look at it and say, okay, yes, there was a way to do that. I can't play the game. But at the same time, if I can watch the game, do I need to play the game?
It depends. Like, if you don't want to play it, then you're not going to buy it anyway. So, has it had any effect?
But if I want to watch it, the example I'm thinking of in sort of early things with it, I'll use my own personal experience. I played through Doom on God mode because I wanted to see what the end looked like. And it's amazing. Like, if you've seen the visuals of the end of Doom, it was really cool. Like, that way you had to fight through it and stuff like that. It was insanely hard. But it's one of those things where, like, when you looked at it and you say, what are these things? What were you dealing with? In God mode, you can't die. You're not really playing the game. You're mostly looking at the visuals. And I remember when I was a kid, we had a neighbor who collected the actual video game machines, the arcade machines. Mm-hmm. And we went to his house and he had one, and I can't even remember what it was, but it was one of these where, and you can see like versions of this out now, where you fly the bomber, World War II era bomber, and you bomb things, or you fly a fighter and shoot things out. It's kind of a fancy version of Space Invaders in some respects, but that's what you do in conjunction with this. And it was the uniqueness of that game is that its backgrounds and all of its imagery was stored on a laser disc that was inside the game. It was the first that did it. That's why he owned it as a collectible. But it had a setting which was effectively God mode. You couldn't die. But the reason it had it is so that you could watch the entire laser disc of the backgrounds. Mm-hmm. And so you kind of look at it and you're like, well, there's a market, presumably, even from early video games, of just watching the game play out.
Yeah.
So I could potentially buy the game just to watch the game play out.
People have done that with, like, Civilization. There's been a bunch of, and I've watched some of these because they're interesting. People will just load in every civilization in the game. I mean, you have to mod the game to do it, but you put every civ in the game, set them all as AIs, and then just turn them loose to play and see what happens. Yeah. Put them on Earth and see, who winds up winning.
Yeah.
It's actually really interesting, just from like a sort of a sociological or an AI perspective on, which civilizations have the most advantages that are the best key to their terrain and their strategies.
Well, I'm gonna jump on it. That's part of the premise of Free Guy. When they get into it, and we're gonna give a bit of the movie away, in conjunction with it here. So if you want to skip for a few minutes if you haven't seen it and want to see it, But Free Guy is an AI, which to me they gave that away 2 minutes in, even though
that's not a big spoiler. Yeah,
they tell you an hour in that it is, but they give it away 2 minutes in from what you have with it. But he's effectively an AI, and he gets triggered and starts learning, and that's the key to what forms him with it. But one of the key lines in the movie, because of the way the code they're looking for and what they're searching for, is who would have thought people would want to just watch AIs live in a world instead of kill them in it?
Yeah.
And it's a key line.
I guess they never heard of The Sims?
Yeah. It's a key line to the movie, but it's one of those things where, again, I comment that movie had some intelligent things in it. It is. There is this incentive to just watch AIs live.
It's almost like a science experiment. Like, why do people have ant colonies?
Yeah.
I mean,
well, and we have there's a bunch of things where you can do simulations on the web. Things like that. There's I'm trying to think. There's the one that's about simulating virus spread. Which became popular obviously at the beginning of COVID. And things that there's a lot of these that just are simulators where effectively what you're doing is you're just watching what happens. You're watching the computer play the computer. And I mean, I've done it. I remember watching the computer play the computer in StarCraft. Just because it was kind of fun to watch what it would do. Same idea of like having Civilization, play the things and play all the cultures. It's kind of interesting sometimes to just see what does the system do. And so that's where I think, and what I'm really saying with this is it's complicated because we kind of look at it and say, what's the nature of the copyrighted work or what's the effect on the market for the copyrighted work? And we look at it and say, well, there really isn't any because the copyrighted work is the game. Except there actually could be, even though you can't play the game. You're just watching.
Yes. Let's say the copyrighted work is the stream itself, but that work is being created as if in a live stream situation it didn't exist before.
Yeah, exactly.
And it may not exist afterwards. So, although I guess you would maybe still need the broadcast rights, the public display rights, how can there be any effect on the stream when you're the one making the stream? Back to my argument that isn't it the streamers? Doesn't the stream belong to the streamer? And now
we're very complicated. And basically that's I think where we're going with this is to say, hey, fair use is not going to really help us here because it's as much as it's complicated as what is copyrighted, now we've complicated is does fair use apply, and if it does, how so? What we're really saying in conjunction with this is, and this is where I sort of started this conversation, we have to look at every individual stream to have any argument about whether or not fair use applies and how it flies. Because they're all different. They all involve different things. How people generate them is different. So let's just toss it. And I think that's where I'm going to start with is, let's get rid of the easy answer I think a lot of people would say is, this is fair use. And say, it's not clearly fair use. It's not clearly not fair use. But it's not clearly fair use, so we can't start there. We have to toss that and say, is there something which it is and deals with here?
We can get some ideas from looking at what Twitch thinks it is, which is evident in their license agreement. So when you go use their service, they have something called the Terms of Service. And in Section 8, called User Content, it talks about what you upload. I'm not going to read a bunch of this to you guys because it is lengthy and
it's legalese.
Written by lawyers. And although it's fascinating reading to me, it will not be to you. So, but it does very clearly say, without any equivocation, that you may only upload the things that you have the rights to upload, including the audiovisual content, music, everything. So you are giving a warranty and a guarantee to Twitch that whatever you upload, you own or otherwise have the rights to upload, including the rights of publicity in anybody who is shown, depicted, or portrayed in your content. And you're saying that you've got all the required consents and permissions from all those people. This is a very common approach by virtually every content platform that lets you upload stuff. They basically have a two-pronged defense for this. One, I put it on the user to collect these rights. I tell them you're not allowed to upload anything that doesn't belong to you, that you don't have the right to upload. If you're caught doing that, I'm going to turn your account off or sanction you or delete it or whatever. And just in case the owner of the copyrighted material that you're uploading gets mad at me, I'm going to register a DMCA agent with the Copyright Office, and if they send me a takedown notice, I'm taking it down.
Yeah.
So you have sort of a statutory solution here in the DMCA. That's the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, if you're not familiar with it. That's a notice and takedown regime enacted in the 90s. Still got it. And they're also requiring the user to agree to not do exactly what we all know the user is going to do.
Yeah, which is interesting, and the conjunction, I think, is the key point, is the user agreement basically says you can't do what you're doing.
Yeah.
In at least some cases. Now, one thing to keep in mind, Are there people on Twitch who have the license rights to do this? Most definitely.
Yeah.
There are Twitches generated by the company that wrote the video game. Are those authorized? Unquestionably.
The NHL one I talked about, where they had some game that was being simulcast on Twitch. Obviously, the NHL owns its own content.
Yeah, exactly. So, there's plenty of these that there's no question of. But we're talking about the ones where it's not that bluntly obvious.
Your 14-year-old who's just getting started on streaming probably, it's possible, but probably does not have any contracts with whatever games he's playing to put this stuff on here. But in that sense, it's no different than YouTube. I watch videos by, I forget his name, he goes by Quill on YouTube, but he does a bunch of Civilization 6 playthroughs, and I've watched a bunch of those.
Well, my daughter is really into watching the Minecraft. The way I put it is it's the dramatic plays within Minecraft.
Yeah.
So they're not really playing Minecraft, they're using Minecraft to do other things.
Yeah, it's a stage
a stage, yeah.
We're back to choreographic works and dramatic works now. It's kind of scripted content.
But, it's those kind of things. I doubt a lot of those people have rights. Now, some of them do. I mean, some of these people have enormous numbers of followers. I think there's a good chance when you start talking about highly influential streamers, these are people who are getting rights. In some sense, and to jump back to the music case, is parodying a song require you to have rights to the song? Not necessarily. Did Weird Al Yankovic get rights to all the songs he parodied?
Most definitely.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was one of his modus operandi. He just did it as part of what he did. Because, one, people were willing to give them to him because of who he was. And so it's those kind of things where there's going to be very, very successful streamers where the underlying company has said, no, we're going to formalize this arrangement. You are allowed to say this. We're going to even pay you, whatever it might be, because of the fact that we want you to do this content. Those kind of formal arrangements may have been non-formal and may have been infringement beforehand, but by the time that you bump into those are fine. What we really talk about in many respects is the less formal stuff.
Yeah.
You then also get into, and you mentioned it, and I was just going to talk about it quick because I think it's worth saying. So let's take Minecraft. If I'm running on Minecraft and I'm running, let's say, 4 different skins on Minecraft that are created by 4 different companies, I don't have rights from all 5, more than likely as to whatever I'm doing, maybe from 1. And so how do you bump into that? You even got the idea, and that's where I want to talk about, that piece of it. Even when we can say rights could be had, there's definitely going to be streams where the odds of somebody having all the rights they need in a strict copyright sense is virtually impossible.
Yeah.
They just never would have thought to ask for.
On that point about you might be getting paid, there is a subsection E of Section 8 of the Terms of Service called endorsements/testimonials. And it says something about you agree that your user content will comply with the FTC's guidelines concerning the use of testimonials and endorsements in advertising, among other things. I won't read the whole thing to you. This has also become a thing over the last 5 years as companies hire social media influencers to endorse and promote their products. Which is nothing wrong with that. You can do that.
Yep.
But if you've ever seen an endorsement on TV, if the person endorsing something was paid to endorse it, it says in the commercial that they received consideration, a paid endorsement.
Actor portrayal. Look for that one on the bottom of drug ads sometimes.
Yes. So there are certain things you have to disclose to people about how you are doing your marketing and promotion, or it's considered a misleading or deceptive trade practice.
Yeah.
I went to have a lawyer here, Charla, who's been on the podcast a few times. She specializes in this kind of stuff in social media. And like a lot of things, the FTC was a little slow to get around to social media because this thing is even more prone to abuse there, where influencers accumulate hundreds of thousands of followers and then run around endorsing, being paid to say this product is great and I love it. Well, now you have to disclose those things. And those contracts are very specific about that and about the person. Because with, unlike a TV commercial, where you film it, you know exactly what the person's going to say. If you pay someone to promote your game on Twitch on like a 5-hour stream, who knows what they're going to say, So you got to kind of cover that risk.
And I think in some sense, that's one where you can kind of look at it and say, hey, the first one, they kind of kicked the content to the user and said, you're responsible for the content. In some sense, this one does make sense because the person who would violate it is the endorser themselves.
Exactly.
So you get into the fact of it's, in some sense, that makes more sense to kick it. It's what you have there. But and again, I think the real key for us in that point of view is just keep in mind there's a whole area, another area,
a whole
of law
separate thing.
here.
It's not really IP, but it involves the FTC guidelines. I'm seeing that more and more in like contracting and stuff, where especially with social media and advertising campaigns, you always got to comply with that stuff. There's a whole separate element to this that goes even deeper, because the question was just what's up with Twitch, not just IP on Twitch. So so we're going to cover that as well. So ultimately, where do we wind up? I mean, it's not clear what exactly is copyrighted. It's not clear if what is streamed is the same as what is copyrighted or by the same people. It's not clear if it's a fair use, and it's definitely clear that you have to have all those rights before you upload it. So how's everybody getting away with this?
So the way I put this, and I'm going to use pick on my kids again, it's what it is because we've been watching a lot of streaming TV. My kids have taken to, my son in particular, has taken to watching old Roadrunner cartoons, which he adores. And it's one of those things where I think what we have here is we have Wile E. Coyote running along the path, the rock that has already been separated but hasn't fallen yet. It's completely stable until he starts jumping up and down on it, or until he realizes that, it's falling. There's a lot of things that happen in those old cartoons, and I think Roadrunner is a perfect example, where nothing happens to the character until they're aware of their predicament. You can run across empty space going straight like there's a bridge there until you look down and realize there's nothing underneath you. And I think that's some of what we have with this right now. We have a stable situation with Wile E. Coyote on a rock that isn't moving. The camera hasn't panned out far enough yet to show whether or not it's attached. And that's kind of, I think, where we stand with this is we really don't know. Is this stuff legal? Now, obviously, it is advancing quickly. Mm-hmm. There's, I think, a lot of what you get into is probably, lawyers internal to these companies or external to these companies that do this may have their own opinions of what they're okay with versus what they're not okay with. Some of them obviously will have, specific policies that say, we're okay with you doing this, we're okay with you doing this. Lucasfilm in particular is one that's known to have stuff, policies out there about what you can and can't do with their stuff. Mm-hmm. And so it's one of those where I think you've got a lot from it where that's really the issue. I think you also, quite frankly, have a lot of just dodging the issue right now because of that argument with isn't what I'm doing actually helping you? Is in some sense, while not a legal argument, a legitimate argument that can convince somebody.
Yeah, you wonder. So two thoughts on that. One is, to what extent do we have basically a commercial detente where, everybody's happy with the status quo, right? It's not really costing the video game companies any money. They have trouble articulating damages. What good does an injunction do you? For every person you enjoin, you're going to get 9 more streamers. I'm wondering if maybe the video game industry has learned a lesson from the music industry's futile attempt to destroy the internet or regulate it. And sue people. I mean, I remember, I won't get into the details on that, but I just remember the music industry really struggled with what to do. We talked about this before on one of our prior episodes. We'll do that one as a rewind episode too. But, when these disruptive technologies show up, the existing industries often don't know what to do about it. Sometimes they react well, sometimes they don't. The music and film industries have kind of struggled. I mean, they're still not making as much money as they were before, Napster. They found a way to survive, but it has completely reshaped the industries. Music in particular, there's no money put into talent acquisition or anything like that anymore. Your artist repertoire. So, it's changed things. And I wonder if the video game industry has looked at this and said, rather than get in aggressively and alienate and annoy our customers, let's not do that. Let's go the other way. And I wonder if they're also being cautious because maybe they don't want there to be an answer here. Yeah,
I think one of the things to keep in mind with this is it's one of these situations, again, I use this Wile E. Coyote analogy on purpose. They don't want to look down.
Yeah.
They know that if they look down, they may have nothing underneath them. But so they're just not looking down. Nobody's looking down. They're standing there not looking down and purposely not looking down, knowing that if they look down, they have a problem. And I think that that's some of what you do see with this is that you have neither side really wants an answer here.
Yeah.
And so we've potentially reached as an impasse, for lack of a better term, in some sense, there's a ceasefire being enforced because simply neither side is shooting.
Yeah.
Not because there's a ceasefire in place.
Yeah. It's a Cold War, right? The shooting never started here.
Exactly.
And everybody's like, you know what? We're all just kind of fine.
And so the question
what an awkward time to have Cold War analogies.
What will happen if shooting starts? And I think that's the biggest thing to take away from this, and the way I put it is, what's up with Twitch, is the answer is legally there are issues here that have not been resolved.
Yeah.
But there doesn't seem to be any motivation currently to resolve them.
The commercial interests of both sides of this seem to be generally aligned, which is what makes it different from music, right? The commercial interests of people who wanted to have free music were diametrically opposed to the interests of people who wanted to get paid to make it.
Yeah.
But with video games, we don't have that. We don't have a situation where they're pirating video games. We have a situation where it's more like what we see on YouTube with people who are putting out, I watch a lot of these now, videos on how to play the guitar or how to play whatever it is you want to learn. Those people are playing popular music, but they are not replacing purchasing popular music. They're doing something different. And I noticed that on YouTube you can find, although some musical artists will aggressively take things down. Don Henley and the Eagles are famous for that. I think Guns N' Roses also does that. Metallica used to. But I can still go on YouTube right now and I can find 45 videos of somebody who's showing you how to play the solo from Hotel California. A pretty clear fair use. I'm just teaching you how to do it, right? Even though maybe the channel gets monetized. So, I think what we have here is that the commercial interests are aligned. And that being the case, why would you start shooting? Yeah,
and I think that's the biggest thing we've really got here is that type of, real situation where we have an impasse because of the fact that nobody wants a solution. They kind of look at it and say any solution may be worse than the current situation because it does give us more definitiveness, and that's a word behind this.
Definition?
Definition may be the thing, but it's not even definition is what I want. I want it to be, definite, as to what it was behind it. And
clarity. We want a clear...
Yeah, you want clarity, and we don't necessarily want clarity because there's a value to it being opaque. And the example I use is it's sort of the same kind of things you bump into sometimes in conjunction with criminal laws. Like, one of the comments I remember them making is they said, if there's no speed limits, you just say you have to drive a reasonable speed, you can get pulled over for driving any speed. Mm-hmm. Right? You have to realize that the opacity there actually gives you the volume to say anything is a violation, while also saying nothing is a violation.
Yeah.
And so, when you get into this type of thing, you kind of look at it and say, well, we can look at it and say nothing's a violation, but I can also say everything's a violation. So if I don't like something in particular, I can always say that's an issue. And I think that's a lot of what we see right now is there's things which are accepted to be used, societal norms. For lack of better terms, I know we both listen to other podcasts, and one of the podcasts we both focus on loves to talk about societal norms. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a good thing, so what it is we have societal norms around this. Whether or not those societal norms are actually legal has not been resolved. But nobody wants to resolve it because they're societal norms. And what we then have is how much do we deviate from those societal norms, recognizing that the societal norm itself could be a violation. So therefore, any deviation could also be found to be a violation. That's what we kind of have as a scenario. And again, I like the Cold War analogy, again, even though it may be strangely inappropriate for, where we stand right now. It's one of those things where, because we really have the idea that says, we're not going to use these. They are being used as a deterrent for other people to use them, which means neither one of us is ever going to.
Yeah.
That's an intriguing concept as to what we have, I think, coming out of Twitch right now.
The norms, I think, is important to reference for a number of reasons. But one is that if the social norms that surround something like this, something like how we use Twitch, how we experience content, if they get too far out of whack with the law or out of synchronization, what you run into is, we can't afford to police everybody. The music industry learned this when we tried suing people to get them to stop. And you'd spend $5 million on a copyright infringement lawsuit against a single mom in Minneapolis who had no money to pay a judgment. It was just declared bankruptcy. So what did you accomplish there, So if you rely a lot, and speeding is a good example, you rely a lot on voluntary compliance. And in most, I'd say maybe most, I know a lot of states, possibly most, speed limits are set based on how fast people are just going to go anyway, if there was no speed limit.
Yeah.
Because there's, for every one police officer, there's 10,000 cars, and who knows? You can't catch everybody. So you have to rely for the efficacy and acceptance of an institution on mostly voluntary compliance or non-compliance that imposes minimal costs on others. And I think this is where copyright failed institutionally with music. The barriers that prevented wide-scale infringement were lifted.
Right. And they were technical. They had nothing to do with law. They were technical.
And the legal solutions we had relied on them being there. When they were gone, the whole thing collapsed. And the industry, went to Congress and said, help us. You got to fix this or we're going to go bankrupt. And we're kind of libertarian types. Much to Congress's credit, they said, we're not sure exactly if we should get involved or not. Unfortunately, Apple solved it for them. So
yeah, basically.
Solved with an asterisk. There's a lot of chaos and change in the music industry, like we said. But the bottom line is we still have one. Okay, so the same thing here. If you have social norms around this that get too out of whack, if you get a copyright institution that is too draconian and too strictly enforced to where this kind of thing is not allowed on like a per se level, I think you get popular revolt and people who are like, you know what, let's just do it anyway. Yeah. Okay, well now what? You're going to sue everybody again? We're right back to where we were in the late 90s, early 2000s. So once again, I think, we've found a way to get all the commercial interests aligned to where it's really kind of better if we just leave it all up in the air and kind of in a gray area.
Yeah. And again, I think the idea behind that is because it allows either side, if the norm gets away from the norms that they're accepted, for whatever reason, this can be individual. One company can treat things differently, one streamer can treat things differently than the other ones would.
Which we see with music. The idea basically being, hey, if I get, if this person goes beyond this line, maybe I have an issue with it. But that line may be different for me than it is for somebody else. So inside the things, let's say it's all okay. It's just this one they have it. We talk about it, in conjunction with, you mentioned the things with music. Certain artists are vastly more protective about stuff being used from theirs. The one I keep in mind is like when I'm going back to our fan fiction episode, my understanding is Anne Rice is extremely protective and doesn't want fan fiction. Okay, that's her position in conjunction with it. Whereas a number of other artists are like, we don't care about fan fiction. We're fine with you guys generating it. And so I think that's a lot of what you have is you have this sort of established norms. And the hard part with this is it's, and I'm going to go sort of, I don't think out on a limb, but I'm going to extend this here. This is not just in streaming. This is not just in Twitch. This is in fan art. This is in fan fiction. Yep. This is in conjunction with, anything that touches on copyright, that may be out there. I remember going to the Renaissance Fair and seeing a guy who does an absolutely hilarious presentation where he does essentially Hamlet and Macbeth simplified, which he's utterly hilarious when he used to. This is years ago. I don't know if he's still out there or not. But, those are fine because those are non-copyrighted works. But, you kind of bump into it and say, is a guy performing, something making fun of, a famous work that also is simultaneously using the work? Do we care about that if he's doing it, at some local Renaissance fair? Like, those are the things that I think we've got this is an area where Twitch is not unique. This happens all over in copyright, where again, we have kind of these societal norms. The hard part with it is we have to recognize, and again, I'm going to jump back to my Wile E. Coyote analogy, there may not be a rock under us. Yeah. Or the rock may be disattached from the canyon wall, as to what it is. It's just because nobody's looking down, we don't know yet. Yeah. And the concern is somebody decides to look down. Because when somebody decides to look down, there may be a rock or there may not be. Yeah. And if there's not, it's not just it's not Wile E. Coyote on the rock. It's all of us, everybody
on the rock. Yeah. And so it suddenly is the what happens with it. I think that's the real key takeaway from this and the way to think about it.
Agreed. All right. Well, I think that's probably enough for today's episode. We could go on about this forever. There are a lot of interesting issues here. If you're interested in this, check out, last summer we talked a little bit about Cory Doctorow, who is, shall we say, a provoker. I didn't have the word for that, but I use mostly to describe my children. But Cory is an interesting follow on Twitter. He knows about as much about copyright and fair use as I think you can know without going to law school. That's not to say I agree with everything he says. I definitely don't. But if you want a thoughtful, nuanced take on fair use, he probably discusses it at least once a month. And he really understands the key to all this, which is that copyright is contextual, fair use is contextual, and if you try to take it out of that context and just say, what are the rules? Well, there aren't any, which is what we're really saying here. Yeah. And that's a feature, not a bug. And even Cory, it's interesting because Kirk and I are both roughly libertarian types. Cory is definitely not. Yeah. But we all agree on this. Like, we all understand that this is how it works and that it's a good thing that it works this way.
Yeah, and it's one of those things you get into the law, and if you go to law school, you get into debates. Is it good to have black letter law, a rigid law that somebody knows
sometimes
what it is and what it isn't? Yeah, sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. Is it better to have a law which is amorphous, where people don't know what it is, and you rely upon something like societal norms? And again,
go back to the speed limit case. Yeah. It's a great example, right? What could be clearer than a speed limit? Yeah. Okay? It's a number.
Thou shalt not go faster than this.
It's 45 miles an hour. If you're going 46, you're speeding. Yeah. Are you ever going to get pulled over for going? No. It's still amorphous exactly how fast you can go. So even when I give you a black letter rule, it's not.
Yeah. And so I think that's, it's that kind of thing within it. I can tell you, from when I went to law school, I think anybody else who had listened to this who went to law school or wants to go to law school, this is something that you get into a lot, in law school, because the question is what is a law?
Oh yeah,
if it really isn't clear,
it's a wide. We talk about this in the podcast. It's a widespread misconception about the law that it is some kind of book somewhere, and I think you see this with blockchain as well, and like Ethereum, and how those smart contracts work. This idea that the law is like a computer program that I can just plug the rules. Once I have the rules, which is the program, I plug the facts in, the input, and I get the output, which is justice. But that's not how the law works. Yeah. There are human beings involved, decision-making involved, the application of discretion, and going back to fair use. That's why there is no rule. I can use up to 3 seconds and it's fine. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. It really depends. So anyway, we could go on about this forever, like I said, but it's a deep, thorny issue. It's a quagmire, and wading through it is exhausting.
Exactly.
Unlike a quagmire, fun.
That's true. Yes, we think this is fun. Hopefully, you guys agree. Assume that's why you're listening to us.
This is what we talk about when we go to lunch.
Exactly.
All right. Well, that's all for today. We'll see you next time. Lauren, play us out.
The views expressed by the participants of this program are their own and do not represent the views of, nor are they endorsed by Lewis Rice LLC, its officers, directors, employees, agents, representatives, shareholders, and subsidiaries. None of the content should be considered legal advice. As always, consult a lawyer. This podcast was produced and recorded in St. Louis, Missouri.
You ruined it. All right, here we go. 3, 2, 1. And welcome back to A Lawyer's Guide to the Galaxy.